Welcome to Covenant Conversations. This is our occasional podcast that attempts to have a thoughtful and meaningful spiritual conversation around all things faith and relationship, with the hopes that it is blessing your faith and your relationships as you make your way in the journey. This week, we have the great privilege of talking to my friend Caleb Saenz, and we're talking about guided Wonderings, which is really a conversation around faith and ADHD. Caleb was diagnosed with ADHD as an adult, and as he'll tell you, he's had it his whole life. And so what we really wanted to do is unpack what is it like as a person of faith to not only discover something about yourself later in life, but then also how did it change what he's doing, and then what is his advice for others who share his wiring and those who love them. And so it's a really wide-ranging conversation. You'll find out pretty quickly. Caleb has no shortage of things to say or directions to take us in, but that's the beauty of the conversation. I'm so excited for you to hear it and for you to be blessed with that as well. And so with all that being said, let's get into the conversation. Welcome to Covenant Conversations. My name is Kyle Burkholder. I'm excited for our conversation today with Caleb Saenz, a good friend of mine who is an adult ADHD survivor. I'm going to let you tell, I'm going to let Caleb tell the story, but what we're talking about today is really what is it like to have faith and ADHD. And it's not some curse or some scourge. It's something that we learn to live with as we go. And for both for kids, for adults, it's a whole different experience to do modern church, modern faith. How does that all work? So I'm going to let Caleb introduce himself, tell us who he is, and then tell us how he found out that he was an ADHD pastor, as it turns out. So Caleb, thanks for being here. Tell us all about yourself.
Well, my name's Caleb. I'm a pastor here in San Antonio, just recently planted about 5 months ago, which, as you'll hear, figures pretty heavily into finally accepting what many people knew about me, which is that I've had ADHD my whole life. I've had the pleasure, of course, of knowing Kyle, Steph, Bella Brixton for a long time. They've been instrumental in ministry, but also instrumental in confirming this ADHD diagnosis. So I'm happy to share about my story, my experience, all those things.
Beautiful. And we will note, if you're listening to this, if you're watching this, you're going to see what this looks like. But if you're listening to this, you may hear background noise. And that's because my friend chose the most distractible place possible to literally record a podcast outdoors in a public place. So if you hear buses, horns, other conversations, we're going to try not to hear too much of it. But that's what's happening. And it is a perfect reflection of what it's like to know Caleb. So let me start here. What is your experience of the church? The church, kind of take that where you want to take that. We're not just talking about Sunday morning, but what's your experience like having ADHD as an adult? Like, what is it like to inhabit a space that, when I think about most religious things, church things, it seems to not be designed for somebody whose brain is kind of cycling through different ideas every few seconds. It seems to be like, sit to here for an hour, listen intently, don't move, and consume it all perfectly and go and apply it. What is it like for you? What's the difference now that you're aware of it? Tell us about that experience.
I think prayer is hard in a church context, period. I think it's true for everybody. Your mind wanders. All of us deal with that. I think it's maybe especially hard for people with ADHD. My experience in church, and this is ironic, is that the hardest thing to be in the moment with is the sermon. And I say that's ironic because since we've planted, I think my sermons have averaged about 45 minutes, so, which I don't think is a byproduct of ADHD, but it might be. What the things that have helped me in church, and I don't think I knew this growing up, is just a clear sense of order. People with ADHD, I think, have probably realized at this point, maybe before or even on the other side of diagnosis, that routines are very helpful. It's some kind of structure. We're all a dog at a dog park without a leash, and it's a wide open field. And so to have some sense of a track kind of invites us back into that. If you were lost in the woods, you're looking for things to bring you back. So for me, a structured service is helpful. But I didn't know that was the case before ADHD. And then when I started walking through this, I was like, oh yeah, that's why, even though I didn't grow up with a sense of liturgy, it's a great passion for how I put services together. So kind of turning in my own weakness into something helpful for the church, that's all been part of the process, I would say.
Does it, so if you know, for example, if you know that there's 2 songs and a sermon and 3 songs, or kind of that framework, or let's take a sermon, since I'm the one shouting at you and you're sitting there listening, if you know that I'm going to be done in 5 to 10 minutes, is that actually a boost for you that helps you get through it? Or what's that difference experience like? Or when have you experienced somebody who preached for an hour and a half and then you were just gone?
So I think, and again, some of this is just true of everybody. I just think it tends to be pronounced in different ways or emphasized different ways in the ADHD brain. I would say for me, it's less a time thing. I'm fine with a longer sermon if the beats of a good structure are there. Meaning, like if it's engaging, not necessarily like relevant for the sake of being relevant, but if things are resonating, the points are resonating. If I'm able to follow, that the length is kind of secondary. When it comes to the service, like I think I kind of grew up in a charismatic environment of like, we don't want to interrupt the flow of the Spirit. But what I've found is that it's easy to get in the flow of the Spirit if somebody can explain to you where you're going as you follow the Spirit. Meaning like, hey, we're going to take this moment to pray this way. Here's why. All those things. And so for me, I didn't know growing up why that was important, but now I'm at a place where not only do I recognize the helpfulness of that, I'm able to incorporate that. I also think it kind of touches into wiring some, like with teaching. You can only teach the way you learn, and so for me, kind of trying to draw attention in storytelling and in analogies and keep that track moving. That's how I have learned. So that's kind of fixtured and been a fixture of my preaching.
That's helpful, because I was thinking you probably, whether it's conscious or subconscious, there's probably a way that you're addressing, knowing the congregation you're teaching has a variety of different, what is the right word for this? Brain typologies, or, neurotypical, atypical. So what are some of the things that you think through that you think other people don't? So I'm more sitting on I don't have this. I don't know what it's like to live with this. How are you thinking about it? And maybe that'll help me or others understand, oh, this is a helpful thing, or this is the way we could think about a way to bless people who are maybe sitting there going, this was not designed for me, or I'm struggling. If only you would do this better or different. Like, how do you do that?
Interaction is helpful. And so sometimes that's formal. Here's the part in the service where we meet and greet people around me, which if you have ADHD and you're an introvert, that can be very difficult. But for me, in different positions of the service, kind of leaning into really what the sermon actually is, which is an opportunity to mediate conversation between us and God through his word and the Spirit. So for me, making sure that there are elements where rhetorical questions are asked, or it really feels not like talking at somebody, but talking with them. I feel like I'm able to, and my brain still jumps around even with medication, but I feel like it's the interaction that also helps keep me tethered. It's when I'm by myself, when I'm daydreaming. So in services where, for example, if I'm ADHD and I'm in a really good place, I don't feel like I'm in a heaviness. Maybe it's not a lament season. It might be easy for my brain to wander. And so to explain like every component of the service is something we do together. If it's not something that's directly blessing us, it's something that's indirectly blessing us by engaging and blessing other people. I think just understanding those things, the communal aspect, is helpful. It's way easier for me to zone out if I'm at home sitting on the couch and we're all watching a show than it is for me at the dinner table talking to my wife and kids.
I'm so glad you brought it up, because my head goes to the dinner table, because I'm thinking a lot of this conversation, the blessing for a lot of the community for this will be going, oh, what can I do better? And how can I be different in engaging people intentionally? And so how does this impact your kind of family life? So you probably, odds are good, you got one kid that shares some of your wiring. do you do dinner time differently? Do you do bedtime differently? What are the practices at home that have changed with the result of knowing what's happening?
Well, we're figuring that out. It's a having. I mean, I've been officially diagnosed for 2.5 years now, and I went through the whole medication process. But it's a little like the Enneagram. When you find out what you actually are, you want to diagnose everyone else. And so for me, I'm like, oh, I have ADHD. Ooh, I'm spotting it everywhere, you know. And so for my daughter in particular, who might have ADHD, it was going like, how much of this is being an 8-year-old, and how much of this is there's something else, which we're still figuring that out. But I again, it goes back to the conversation element. It's funny, like I find myself when I'm most energized, capable or at least telling myself I'm capable of pursuing many threads. When we get to the end of the night and I am like depleted, my medication, which is a 12-hour release, has gone bye-bye. All those things become nails on the chalkboard. Now my brain's exhausted. It's all
Mm.
medication conversation. But it's the slowness of a conversation where teaching the kids that everybody gets a chance to talk and we affirm what people say. So questions have been helpful. Really, we've made an effort in the last year to really lean on a few things. More time at the dinner table together. Family movie night, where we all get to actually have a night where we rest and watch TV together. Not zoning out, but we're resting in that way. And then game night, which competition, I don't know how you'd incorporate that in the church, but it does require you to be on some kind of track. It's a kind of interaction, but he who is distracted is in last place. So those things those things force me to be fully present. But I think what you're asking is what what are the things you do for you that you have in common with a 9-year-old and a 4-year-old? So there's quite a
We've
few, but
we've
yeah.
been asking that for a long time. Um, so that's that. It's all getting more interesting even as we talk, because it even thinking of you and who you are and who I've known you to be. My wife is in the similar brain space. Like the last thing you need is a lecture on anything. Um, and so as we think about how we instruct others, kids, even just like neurotypical people but it's like nobody wants that. And it's just what you said earlier. You were like, it's just more pronounced. Like I just feel it first. Um,
Hmm.
that was super interesting to me because it's instructional for how we love each other well and engage each other. Okay, so then what are the tips? I know maybe I would tell you to put yourself in two different spots. So one, you are who you are today, but then go back to like 12-year-old you or 19-year-old you or whatever. Pick a couple. But what tips or tricks have you learned that have helped you thrive? Or what things do you think would have helped you thrive back in the day? And this isn't, again, not just Sunday morning, but that's a part of it. And that's a helpful part of it because we can expand that to the dinner table and the classroom and all the other places. But so what are the tips and tricks that would change little Caleb's life and that today you go, this literally is a week changer. If I do this one thing, it's everything.
Yeah, I think there actually is a lot of overlap when it comes to ADHD between the classroom experience and the maybe like the gathered worship experience, where they're in an environment of practicing and learning, and so I think some of the overlap is similar. I didn't know it at the time, but there's a benefit in what you might call guided wandering. So
Mm.
your brain is, and I'm just making that phrase up. So if it makes no sense, you can edit it out, or or do AI voiceover with something more profound. But the way your brain is wired does not have to be uh, a curse or some kind of burden. It's like anything else. When you understand something about yourself, you're able to steward it. And so, for a long time, maybe there was probably an implicit fear in me that addressing ADHD, both in diagnosis and medication, would kind of remove creativity, which I think is a passion of mine, something I've been blessed with. But it's done the opposite. It's kind of helped me stick to a track on a single creative thought instead of 5,600 creative thoughts. But at the same time, I do think having, like for me, I do a lot now in ministry I've never had to do, that's administrative, executive, but it's the creative projects that give me the opportunity to wander. And so if you're 12 or if you're in high school or entering into college, I think it's maintaining spaces where you can wander. And it doesn't have to be a creative aspect, but just activities that don't feel, it's a balance, right? Like having activities that let you be who you are, that really balance out the structure you need.
Mhm.
I think everybody deals with that in some way, but for people with ADHD, the balance is a much starker contrast.
Hmm. Okay. Guided wandering is maybe one of the more profound things you've ever said. I'm not sure, but
Yeah, we'll
what
see.
is Christianity other than guided wandering?
Hmm. Hmm.
So go back to the
Hmm.
desert and go back. See, we can go back to the early days and go. This has always been about guided wandering. You think of the disciples following Jesus, and they don't know what they're doing, but
Hmm.
they're being guided along this path of trying to figure it out. So maybe is there something discipleship related? Because you're a pretty fierce discipler, which always surprises me. It charms me about
Yeah.
like you're one of the more social, one of the more just you got 100 irons in the fire at all times, and you're like, also I've been meeting with this young worship leader for the last 6 months every week for 4 hours a week, and I'm like, how do you have time? So is there something in your discipleship world that this guided wandering is there more wisdom to unpack there? What is that?
I would say two things. Maybe I'm a big fan of alliteration, so my brain goes to relationship and remembrance. And so, so much of I relate so much to the wandering of the people in the Old Testament. There's a reason "Come Thou Fount's" my favorite hymn. It's like prone to wander, Lord, I feel it, not just in my heart, like in my brain. I feel it even as we're singing this song. But I think remembrance is very helpful. It's Jesus says, "Do this in remembrance of me," and the remembrance at the time is not like recollection or recollection. I had a professor in seminary who said if you asked an Old Testament Israelite to tell you about his high school graduation, he'd say, "Wait here," and he'd walk back in a cap and gown and go through the whole service. It's an embodied trait. And so for me, remembrance is something it's embodied. And so my whole self is involved in remembering. It's like bringing me back into the fold. There's a great book uh, on Lent. Catherine Green McCrae wrote a while back, and one of the things she says is like if you're lost and you've got this map in front of you, it doesn't matter how detailed the map is if you don't have the "You are here" red dot. And so
Mm.
for me, that's what my brain can feel like many times, and it's remembrance that tells me you are here. And so recognizing that about myself, that's true of everyone to an extent. I mean, it's a biblical concept. We have to remember where we are. She brings up Job. Job was like, "Where were you when this happened?" And God responds with the question, "Where were you? Like this is, I have done all these. The answers you've been with me. I've held you this whole time." And the other thing is relationship, and of course with God, but with one another. Like someone else's testimony or encouragement is an opportunity to help me remember, and vice versa. When I remember where I am, it's an encouragement to other people. And so that beacon that kind of draws me to home is louder when it's shared in relationship.
Hmm. Okay. So I'm gonna keep digging because this
Do
is
it.
it's getting it's just getting more interesting. So is there something, and I may be wrong here, is there something in your memory bank that there's a blessing to the physicality of remembrance for you? So
Mm.
whereas the modern Western way of learning, remembering, regurgitating, it's all very abstract and it's all it's stuck in your head. It's placeless. It's not embodied. Is there some practice that you have, or is there a reason you work with people? Like I don't think I've ever seen you in an office. Like, you're always out with people. You're always doing things physically, um, and that may not be ADHD related. That's just a faith relation thing. I'm curious about that sort of embodied sense, meeting in person with people. Is there something else there that changes our kind of brain structure when we think of Western learning to like we're following an ancient Eastern practice? What is the just
Yes.
talk about that?
At I'm like everything else. I probably stole this from somebody, but we repeated at church often that um, discipleship happens in laboratories and lecture halls. So where are the spaces where people get to do the work of discipleship, not hear about it or try to pick it up by osmosis, but participate. And the thing we do both in the church and when I meet with people, one of the reasons I enjoy my office. When I had it before we planted, I had just gotten it perfect, and then we got the call to plant. So there you go. But I think the thing is meals. It's sharing a meal, and I watched y'all do communion every week, and I love it. It's a great leveler for me. I can feel very prideful about the sermon I just preached. I got it in under 50 minutes, but it levels there, or I can feel very, very low, and it's a leveler the other way. But it's a cognitive remembrance that we all participate in together, and I think that that's true in that very clear sacramental sense on a Sunday. But it's true just sitting with somebody that, um, especially people in ministry and in the church, because Colossians 3:16, the word of Christ, it dwells richly among us. It's present in this meal. And you get different sides of people. There's a vulnerability that comes. I mean, you and I have a mutual friend who was terrified of eating in front of other people for a long time. And as odd that as that seemed in San Antonio, a city known for its obesity problem, where everyone eats constantly and openly, I think in his fear that there was a deep understanding that this is a vulnerable activity, and so that has become. I don't know that I would have been able to word why meals were so important to me in relating to other people, but now that we're planting the church and so much of what we do and ministering to people has shifted towards meals, I'm understanding that's what's so helpful.
Hmm. Okay. I mean, I did not expect to get into the San Antonio obesity crisis, but I'm glad you brought that to the front.
We're moving down. We might still be in the top 5 big cities, but I
I
think we will.
mean, New Orleans, Houston, it's a 3-way race. So it just means the food's good.
That's right.
So if someone came to you at 25 years old, you have a young church member, they come to you, they're like, hey, look, I've squeaked through college. I've felt like my brain's on the fritz my whole life. And then I finally got this adult ADHD diagnosis. I feel really much like I feel affirmed, right? Oh, well, this is why that's the way this works for me. And it's not a wrong thing. It's just different. What would you tell them when it came to here's how your life's going to change, or here's some practices for you specifically as you uncover this, here's how you're going to thrive? How would you explain that to a young church member who just found out that this is what they were living with?
You have described an exact scenario that has happened multiple times since we planned it. It's almost like I talk about this a lot. I did tell people, and I'm getting a little ADHD here because I'm going to talk about 3 things and bring it back, hopefully, to the middle. But I tell people when I'm expressing my gratitude for our church, I think, 3 people. My wife, of course, Emily Diaz, she's our project manager with Stadia, and Vyvanse, which is my medication for ADHD. Without those 3 things, we wouldn't be here. But what I want to tell people is, uh, whether you're on medication or not, speaking to somebody who's a professional who can kind of explain some things to you is always helpful. Medication is almost secondary at that point once you know what you have. And I know plenty of people with ADHD who just manage it somehow. It's the name of Michael Scott's book, Somehow I Manage. See, firing on all cylinders. For me, how I finally came to decide about getting diagnosed is very funny. And it ties in with getting all these things confirmed by the person who diagnosed me. But I was, we had prayed about planting. We talked to friends, you and Steph, of course, and really got some wisdom about some things, and spoke to my lead pastor, got affirmed. And I told him, hey, we worked on a timeline together. Give me 6 months. I'll work on, our plan before we announce it to the church and get a core team together. He's like, great, great. So I put together a prospectus, spent a ton of time on it. I mean, it probably took me twice as long because I wasn't on medication yet or diagnosed, but it came together. It was really good, beautiful, all those things. And about a month before, maybe less, we're about to announce this gather core team announces plant to the church. I get a letter in my mailbox that says I have a warrant out for my arrest. I'm like, what in the world? And I open it and it says failure to appear for a speeding ticket. And I'm like, what? What does this mean? And I'm looking at him going, no, I did defensive driving. I know I paid for it, and I look and I never submitted any of the defensive driving material. So I called my friend. He's a lawyer. He helps me work it out. And I was like, dude, I don't know. I probably just have ADHD or something. How do you forget something like that? He goes, oh, yeah, you definitely have ADHD, which is, I feel like that should be under my bio and everything. It's like, yeah, he definitely has ADHD. So finally, I was like, this can't happen. Like, this can't happen again. I need to get planted with some semblance of stability. So I talked to my primary care physician, found a place to get diagnosed, and the guy I spoke to was so encouraging and so helpful. He said a couple of things. Number one, there's no such thing as adult ADHD. You didn't develop it. You've had it your whole life. But number two, the reason you haven't noticed it as acutely is because you've had a structure around you to cover for many of those mistakes, either in strong parents, good friends, great teachers, whatever that looks like. You grew up with a very stable structure, which is not the case for everyone. Just, I think people who realize they have ADHD, sometimes it's that they don't have that structure necessarily. But he said you had a very stable structure environment where you kind of work beyond it or past it. And he goes, now that you've gotten older, you are that environment. Your career's changed. You've got new responsibilities. And you are realizing as you drop things what has always been the case as your environment adjusts to where you're at. And that was like the big light bulb moment for me to go, okay, there's something to this. So, and I spoke to him about the creativity thing I mentioned earlier. Like, is this going to change who I am? I don't want to, be a robot. And he said, actually, I think it might enhance all the things that you enjoy about who you are. And that has been the case. The medication journey, that's probably the third thing I'd say, is have patience with the treatment. I started out on, and this might matter to some people, Strattera, which is a non-stimulant, and went through that for about 6 months, maybe 7 months. And the nausea was so significant that I went to a stimulant with Vyvanse. And I was a little worried. And then when I got on Vyvanse, my blood pressure had to find some sense of equilibrium, which took probably another 3 months. But I've been on Vyvanse now for about 13 months, and it has been phenomenal. I can tell the days I don't take it, absolutely, and I can tell when it runs out. But all those things are manageable, and the older you get, there's many more things to manage. But I would say that talk to a professional, express your fears, really just kind of acknowledge where you're at. I think changes or movements and stages of life can expose things that were always there, and that's usually more helpful than it is harmful. And then just have patience with what the other side of diagnosis might look like.
I have a follow-up to that, but I have to ask first, didn't you get a ticket? You drove with me moving us to Ohio, and you got a ticket in Illinois. And if I recall correctly, you didn't pay that ticket either for a while.
No. I'm on the state of Illinois' most wanted list. That was very funny because it was a speed trap. We came down a hill. The guy was hiding behind the other side of the overpass. And we got pulled over, and he's like, "What are you guys doing?" I remember very vividly going, "Well, we're both pastors, I'm moving somebody." It's like, "That's great. Here's the ticket." It's like, "Oh man, that was probably God's first invitation to get take stock of my life." So,
I appreciate that you blame the downhill speed trap as the
that's right.
justification for sin. That was helpful.
You know what it was? I was so distracted by the music that I wasn't paying attention to the speed.
Yeah, that's the beauty of Southern Illinois. Okay, so my actual follow-up was, all right, so now I'm the young person. I've come to you. I said, okay, so I think I have this. I went to my doctor. I'm getting diagnosed. Whatever, medicine, no medicine, doesn't matter. They're choosing their journey. What have you experienced as a faith blessing? Because I know you to be so thoughtful. You're an artist. You're a poet. You're a writer. You have a prayer life that I'm often jealous of in the depth and kind of thoughtfulness of how you commune with God. What if anything, maybe it's nothing, what if anything has changed post diagnosis for you that's been an enhancement in your spiritual life that you go, this has been different, and maybe here's why?
I think keeping connection and tabs with the things that matter has been helpful, because I think one of the downsides to ADHD is that you kind of lose a sense of priorities. So I'll be, researching something for a sermon, and this is pre-diagnosis and medication, and I'll have a thought, and the rabbit trail will last for 40 minutes, and it's it's like the momentum's there, and I'm on Wikipedia, and I'm on, who knows, I'm researching some random trial, in Europe in the 1950s. But that's the idea. And so the benefit for me, and not just in sermon preparation, but for prayer time, has been really help with priorities. And then uh, if I do the thing all of us Christians do, it's just I'll pray for that person. I'll reach out. I'm getting better. I'm not. I wouldn't classify myself as good at it yet, but I'm getting better at follow up, and I'm getting better about actually praying for people. And
Hmm.
so those things have been helpful. There's more plates than ever to juggle. So I wonder if I wonder if on the surface I look the same as I did 4 years ago, but there's more that's being held up right now. So um, I know that's a big part of having that, and it's the same with people who are balancing. Um, I would say a work life and a faith life. The idea of balance is silly. They're not don't need to be in contention, and they're not truly separate. But it does require priority, and I think
Hmm.
that's where diagnosis medications helped me in particular.
Hmm. Okay. So it's become a tool that's actually you've been able to apply, and that's interesting. I wouldn't have
Mm,
thought of any of it, so I'm glad you said it. Um, I kind of don't know where to go with this, so I have two options, and one
yeah.
is in my house we call ADHD a superpower because there's hyper focus is a thing. So people who know what that is, you can Google it if you need to. But essentially, there's like occasional hyper focus where it's like we get lost, and I have a kid that'll play piano for 4 straight hours or dance for 8 straight hours. You're like, how did you do that? And it's a weird like other side of the coin scenario. But there's also occasional frustration with it's I'm frustrated with myself that I fail to like in faith matters. That's a great one. I fail to follow up, or I failed to actually pray
Hmm.
for someone I said I was going to, or whatever. Um, but if it's a superpower, like we believe, if every blessing is a burden or every strength is also a weakness, um, what's the encouragement for the 35-year-old mom that's walking into our church on Sunday morning of how to apply their superpower to their faith life? What does that look like?
Mm. Yeah, I think that I love the superhero idea. Number one, because I'm very prideful, but number two, I think I think for me, that reaching out to things that feel random, the the thing that I feel makes me unique is that I'm able to retain the things that I reach out to. And I don't know that that would be the case without ADHD. I get made fun of often for quoting random things, but I think it's because the things that bless me, I've reached out, gone on this thought adventure, and I brought that thing back. And so connections, I think, are part of that superpower. Connecting things with people and
Mm.
being an extrovert is helpful. But I think the frustrating side of that, and I think this comes up often in conversation, is my brain feels like it's moving on before people are ready. Sometimes I wonder if me listening to podcasts at 1.5 speed is making that problem worse. I speak quickly. I'm not trying to. That can come across as trying to move people along in conversation. And this you'll never experience this more than you will in a marriage. But I constantly like we come back to the home base of I'm not trying to move you along. I'm trying to participate. But that's my brain stays on track by participating. So I'll respond with what people say, but for some people that can feel intrusive, and because people process differently. And so I would say in know yourself and know your friends. Know yourself, know who you're talking to. Um, and that's where diagnosis is actually helpful. Like your friends who love you probably, if you have ADHD, have suspected that for a long time. So it's nice to just be out in the open and go like, "Hey, I'm sorry. My brain was over here. Can you just say that one more time? I really want to listen." Or if you're on the other side of it and you love this person, you go, "Hey, come back to me. I don't know where you went, but come back right here." Um, like meetings can still be difficult for me, especially ones I'm not leading because I'm thinking about other things, and so then I'll circle back and repeat something somebody else just said 2 minutes ago, which that's a frustration to me. It's probably a frustration at the table too. So I just think the vulnerability of sharing this part of the journey with other people in trust that they're going to accept who you are,
Mm.
but in an encouraging way, draw you to a place of mutual understanding and health. So
that's really helpful. Just the shared awareness does change everything, because the things you're saying, we've had these, like, I will be talking and I am prone to verbosity. My wife will let me finish and be like, I stopped listening about 3 minutes into that conversation. And I'm like, well, can you tell me the last thing I said? She's like, no, it's been a long time. Or we'll get to, I'll start talking and I'll recognize it in real time. And I'll be like, hey, what are you thinking about? And she'll tell me, and it isn't the thing that I'm talking about at all. And then I'm like, okay, let's readdress here. But it's also trained me, and maybe this is the help for the general population, is it's trained me to be more sensitive to that interaction. So, like, am I seeking that affirmative kind of mirroring effect in a conversation? Am I asking, does that make sense? I'm inviting participation, because you even said earlier, I need to participate to stay engaged. Yeah. And so it's helped me in my home to go, I need to invite participation here, because I can see eyes glazing over and, the squirrels start running and people are gone. So that's actually really helpful for all of us, both whether we suspect we're living with this or if we just think we maybe need to be better and more sensitive. All right. Well, your cup of coffee looks empty, and I've used as much of your time as I can. You get the last word. What else would you want to say? You have free reign to tell anybody anything, but what would be on your heart to say related to this or anything else?
It's a really good question. I think for me, we don't think of any diagnoses really, but ADHD sometimes can feel separate from discipleship. Like, it's its own component I have to figure out, but all of discipleship is stewarding who you are and following who Jesus is. And I think for me, the frustration sometimes with how I'm wired can create a desire to separate or compartmentalize that part of who I am. That same author I mentioned earlier, Catherine Green McCreight, she has a book on depression. It's beautiful. If you ever struggle with that, it's a great book to read. It's called Darkness is My Only Companion. But she has a passage in there about the beauty of the gospel is that we're so much more than our personalities, which are dynamic, our mental capacity, which can fluctuate and change over time. There's something deeper in us that God values and has called to resurrection life. And so even in your weakness and frustration with this, even in the ways it affects habits, relationships, routines, vocation, you're so much more than the struggle. And there's opportunity to see that in the middle of the struggle as you really depend on God for clarity and wisdom and how to address with who you are and how you're wired.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay. That's rich. There's nothing I'm going to add to that. That's beautiful. So grateful for you. Tell us how we find you. If somebody is listening to this and they're in San Antonio or the area, how do they find your church? Or then how do they find you if they want to connect with you personally?
Our church is the Garden, SA for San Antonio.org. You can go there and find out more about us. We got some resources. We're really passionate about Lent this year. So we got a podcast, guide, weekly devotionals, all that stuff. I'm at Caleb J. Saenz on Twitter, which right now is primarily Spurs nonsense. We're terrible, but we might have the next Michael Jordan, so it's fine. And then on Instagram, it's a lot of, I got really into photography, which is part of that guided wandering. It's been it's less expensive than record collecting. So that's a whole other thing. But both of those things, that's where you can find me. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for making time for this. Thank you to everybody for listening, joining in on this conversation. This has been so rich, and I feel like I have even new ways to approach people in my life I love. And hopefully, if whether you're in Caleb's shoes or in mine, you have gained some new insight, and the discipleship journey is just a little clearer from here on out. So thank you for joining us. And until next time, keep the conversation going.